bring Denise back to Songbook Print Conference when I go. She's always so excited. And we get blessed with it all. So we're in week 5 of our unfolding series on the benefits of living unity truth principles. And it's the, is it penultimate?
The one before penultimate.
Penultimate. It's the penultimate lesson, or next week will be the end of our series. And every week I begin with a recognition that unity's inherently practical approach to spirituality means it has always been about determining the way we are to think and act and be in order to transform our lives in meaningful, measurable, and rewarding ways. Specifically, offering an evolving worldview or paradigm that calls us as individuals and collectively to continually grow in knowledge, awareness, and wisdom, including developing meaningful responses to the age-old questions, who am I and why am I here? In essence, to help us discover meaning and purpose. And also, to provide a multidisciplinary and integrated, ever-evolving path of discovery and exploration, deepening, healing, integration, skill building, and practices to support this continuing growth and wholeness. As we do that, it increases our capacity for free will by realizing that life happens from the inside out. Practicing right thinking and expanding our self-awareness, for example, our limiting social, religious, childhood ego and outward-based programming so that we can release what no longer serves us and choose to develop new ways of being. It's also about awakening our faith-thinking faculty, in essence, our capacity to tap directly into divine mind or universal truth, and thereby expand and evolve our human consciousness and our original intuitive insights and understanding. And finally, as we talked about last week, teaching affirmative prayer and meditation disciplines that are aligned with the perennial mystical traditions that practice the presence of God, as well as multiple measurable, positive, physical, and emotional, mental, and spiritual benefits to the human condition. Before we move on in today's topic, I want to say a few more things about prayer. As Michelle revealed during last week's meditation, when she covered our 5-step prayer process, Unity has a very distinct concept of prayer, and it involves both prayer and meditation. In fact, most of you have probably heard me and or Michelle say prayer is about talking to God and meditation is about listening to God. But it's actually a little more nuanced than that. As you know, at Unity of Monterey Bay at least, we intentionally acknowledge the 3 faces of God every single week as we do our affirmation. Or more accurately, we emphasize the multiple ways that humans experience God or the divine. In essence, infinite God beyond us, intimate God beside us, inner God being us, always divine love in action. And that includes acknowledging our need or desire sometimes to talk to God or talk with God. Nevertheless, we also understand that prayer is always about changing us. So we're not praying to a God out there to somehow fix the dilemma we're in or to intervene in whatever's going on according to what we think would be the best way, which is often not the best way for us. But that's not what we're talking about when we talk about praying to or with God. Actually, it's about just using the language that works for us, that helps us center, that helps us align our thinking and our minds with that inner presence, with that divine essence, with that universal mind that is within. Ultimately, Unity teaches us to evolve our prayer language from asking to affirming. And in that affirming, again, we're affirming our thoughts to be in alignment with truth. So for example, rather than praying and asking for God to heal us, we affirm that our inherent spiritual nature is already whole, perfect, and complete. We establish this consciousness within us and thereby co-create our healing and health, again, from the inside out. That was what Myrtle Fillmore did. That was the beginning basis of the entire Unity movement. But we start where people are, which is why any kind of prayer you feel comfortable with is a good place to start. And then we continue to focus on shifting our awareness and our understanding of the power of prayer in this way. We also can pray and affirm in song. And we know that when we sing, we reap the benefits of singing by bypassing our analytical, doubting brains. You know, when we sing, we don't second guess it. For example,
joy fills every cell in my body. Every cell is alive with love. I relax into the healing process. I allow Spirit to do what it does.
So in these ways, we begin to change the narrative. We begin to change the story that's going on in our mind about whatever challenge we're experiencing, be it a health challenge or an employment challenge or a prosperity challenge or a relationship challenge. We begin to shift from seeing it as a problem that's confronting us to moving into what is actually the truth. And as we change that narrative, it begins to impact how we experience and how we respond to the specific issues. I particularly like this song because it clearly leaves room for God. It allows us to create miracles. And what we mean in unity by miracles isn't an outer intervention from a God out there that breaks all the laws and changes something, but rather a shift in our perception such that we see what's going on in entirely new ways that we hadn't considered before. When we leave room for God, I mean that we leave room for the unfoldment of our highest good that may be and often is beyond our current understanding or our conscious desires. For example, most of us would say we would never pray for or want the crises that come into our lives, and yet many times in hindsight, those crises become the most powerful transformations in our life, and we wouldn't give them up. I often share, and it's in Rory's book, that he talked about cancer as being his life-transforming illness rather than his life-threatening illness. It opened up a whole new way of being for him. And in the same way, because we train ourselves to look at the world this way, when I lost Rory, I learned a whole new way of that I don't ever lose anybody, that in fact that love lives on within me, and it also opened up a whole new vision of what was mine to do and learn and grow into. So while we can create and achieve many things through the power of our will, I've found that the most powerful and transforming prayer practice is the one that seeks only to know and embody God and truth and love and joy and peace more in our lives. It is in fact a form of surrendering. It's allowing us to trust that whatever is showing up in our lives is for our highest good, and then making it so by growing into it, by leaning into the challenge and finding the blessings and lessons that lie within it. Okay, so that was my addition postscript about prayer. And moving on, what we recognize is that all of these teachings and practices, including an evolving worldview and integrated right thinking, affirmative prayer, and practicing the presence, are interrelated and overlapping. You can't pull one out and say, this one does this and this one does that. In fact, they all work together. They all support one another, and they all support our continued growth and evolution. And the same is true for our topic this morning, which is about spiritual maturity or intelligence. And that involves our intentional commitment to and engagement with practices that enhance our spiritual growth. In essence, leaning into life, seeking understanding, meaning, purpose, wisdom, connection, and fulfillment in an intentional and ongoing way. And that includes, for example, that shifting of how we view prayer. When I came into Unity, I was attracted to this very direct and powerful, whatever you pray for, whatever you affirm is going to demonstrate in your lives. And there are still individuals that hold that premise. My prayer practice has continued to deepen such that I don't pray for specific things. I pray for highest good. I pray for my biggest unfoldment. I pray for greater understanding. And those prayers are always answered and always end up being for my highest good, rather than me praying for something that I actually manifest and find out it wasn't what I really wanted. Anybody ever done that? Just a few of us, yes. I think the universe is wiser than we are, and so if we surrender into that, we get what we need to grow. So just to clarify, I personally like the term spiritual maturity rather than spiritual intelligence, because for me it more clearly points to our potential for progressive spiritual growth that is dependent on intention and practice and maturing. We all know what that feels like as we mature from our childhood ways into more adult ways. But I have to say that these two terms are interchangeable, and most of the literature out there talks about spiritual intelligence, so I'll probably go back and forth throughout the lesson. So surprisingly, or maybe not, the first concept of spiritual intelligence was developed in the 90s for the corporate world. It was used as a means of motivating employees and providing a non-religious, diversity-sensitive framework for addressing issues of values in the workplace. In the year 2000, author intuitive Michael Levine, how many of you have read some of Michael Levine's books? He's a powerful, intuitive, spiritual writer, adapted this concept to the spiritual journey as a perspective, offering a way to bring together the spiritual and the material that is ultimately concerned with the well-being of the universe and all who live there. So this sense of wholeness, spiritual maturity, for Michael Levine, became this way that we moved into a wholeness of living. Clearly, the idea continued to flourish, and there are now multiple quality models and books on the subject. Unity has worked extensively over the last decade or so with Cindy Wigglesworth. I love that last name. She's an expert in spiritual intelligence and has developed assessment tools and trainings and everything around that. And so I'm going to focus mostly on her approach to this, though there are, as I said, a myriad of ways to approach it. Her company is called Deep Change, and her book was SQ21, The 21 Skills of Spiritual Intelligence. Wigglesworth begins with a simple model of 4 intelligences, presented as a pyramid, that demonstrate a very basic sequence in our human development. She acknowledges that this is too simple of a model to really cover all the ways human beings learn and know and grow, but it's a useful illustration. At the base of the pyramid is physical intelligence. As babies, we first focus on learning to control our bodies. And then we move into our linguistic and conceptual skills, beginning to develop what we call our IQ, the thing that we're most aware of, that's been around the longest time. And that's the key focus of our, at least American, educational process. So for the next 18 years, we do a whole lot of work with developing those linguistic and conceptual skills in our public education. We all engage in some early development of relationship skills, and so the third layer on the pyramid going up is emotional intelligence. We develop those in our families and our schools, but absent a conscious, healthy family model or other relevant directed instruction, we tend to model or react to what we experience. We tend to develop coping skills that may serve immediate childhood needs, but often sabotage our later relationship and endeavors and professional endeavors. In fact, many of us only begin to focus on developing our emotional quotient or our emotional intelligence when we realize that we need to improve based on feedback from our marriages, our romantic partnerships, our families, and our work relationships, where we have breakdowns and we start going to take classes or read books or seek counseling about how we can better communicate and have relationships with others. In fact, like spiritual intelligence, emotional intelligence was defined and developed in the 90s by the business world. There had been precursors, of course. Psychological studies in the 1920s described what they called social intelligence, which was the ability to understand and manage men and women, boys and girls, to act wisely in human relations. It's an interesting idea, huh? The actual phrase emotional intelligence, however, was popularized by Daniel Goleman in his 1995 book of the same title, wherein he reported on a 1993 research study, again done in business, that was developed to distinguish star performers from their average cohorts. And the study found that they could attribute their superior success to their significantly stronger relationship skills and personal networks. It wasn't about how smart they were, it was about how well they got along. And we all know that. If we go to, in our jobs and such, that the smartest people are often not the most successful because they have difficulty interacting with other people sometimes, or they just don't have those skills. And yet someone with moderate skills but great human skills can become a powerful leader. Coleman goes on to identify 4 basic quadrants of aptitudes, each with specific skill sets that would enable and support the development of this relationship skills and personal networks that prove to support excellence in work. He named those quadrants self-awareness, other awareness, self-management, and relational skills. Shortly after that, Harvard Business School endorsed this study and the idea of spiritual intelligence, and it very quickly became a mainstream concept and the focus of business coaching and human relations trainings and such throughout the 90s and still today. Ultimately, it pretty quickly crossed over from that business focus, however, to the self-help realm of personal and romantic and family relationships. Many of us can probably remember the first time we saw you need to develop your emotional quotient, you need to learn how to interact, and the acknowledgement that we don't get instruction on that in schools. We began to identify within our society that it's a whole area that's missing in how we teach our children how to be. And in families that don't already have it, there's not a lot of ways to teach it there either. In fact, what we tend to learn are dysfunctional models rather than functional ones. So the realm of emotional intelligence has continued to expand and inform this most important element of our ongoing human development and evolution, not the least of which is providing essential skills for the 4th and final intelligence, which is spiritual intelligence, what we're looking at this morning. In fact, emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence, EQ and SQ, represent 2 mutually inspiring and reinforcing paths to the same goal of increasing awareness and understanding of what it means to be human. There are people that don't, especially today, the nuns are growing, people that don't have spiritual communities or paths, and then there's a whole bunch of people that may have religious paths, and that's not the same thing as a spiritual path, that begin to seek their growth through the psychological model. In fact, the Course in Miracles that many of us here have partaken in, and that what actually brought me to Unity, actually came through the counseling community. And so we begin, not surprisingly, to see this blending of psycho-spiritual counseling and an awareness, even as we begin to expand the definition of God and what spirituality is, an awareness that those 2 fields can't exist without one another. We also now see that that's actually even moving into sociology and medicine and everything. We're becoming a more integrated awareness. For me, spiritual maturity and intelligence is about taking the most holistic approach to our human journey, recognizing that our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual dimensions are all deeply intertwined, to use one of Dan's words. It just works so well, doesn't it? You can just feel it intertwined. Yeah. This capacity for spiritual intelligence is usually the last one to awaken in us. In fact, in Unity, we find that other than kids that grow up in it, which is kind of a rarity in Unity, people are often attracted to this movement in their 40s and 50s and 60s, when they've gotten done with the business of growing up and getting a job and having a family, and they begin to ask questions, or perhaps have a health challenge or some other kind of challenge, which is what often initiates this spiritual intelligence journey. It's that question, is this all there is? Isn't there more? That often brings people to the spiritual journey. But whatever the instigation, spiritual intelligence grows as we seek greater understanding and deeper meaning and greater purpose and fulfillment and the inner peace that seems to come from such gifts and capacities. Wigglesworth defines spiritual intelligence as the ability to act with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace, regardless of the circumstances. Now, doesn't that sound like what we would all like to be? All like to be wise and compassionate and never lose our cool. She goes on to identify, in much the same way that Goldman did about emotional intelligence, she identifies 21 accessible, meaning that we can assess our own levels of accomplishment in these areas, 21 accessible skills and capacities, again, divided into 4 quadrants that pretty much mirror Goldman's emotional quotient quadrants, that seem to represent the common threads among the major faith traditions, modern psychology, and many philosophers and spiritual writers. And when they're all combined, because again, we can develop one side without the other and we get an unbalanced experience, the idea is to realize we usually are, in all things in life, we have natural skills and natural abilities that happen, and then we have to develop the other ones. But when they're combined, they help create and support spiritual maturity, even under great stress. So I've outlined the 4 quadrants and the respective skills, the 21 issues, in the handout that you received when you came in. So this morning I'm only going to mention what they're called. So the first quadrant, similar to emotional intelligence, is higher self and ego self-awareness. The second quadrant, universal or other awareness. The third quadrant, higher self and ego self-mastery. And the fourth quadrant, spiritual presence and social mastery. Spiritual intelligence takes that EQ model, the emotional intelligence model of self-awareness, to that next meta level, where we're not only getting in touch with our feelings, able to identify them and even maybe share what those feelings are, and also what the triggers are, but in spiritual intelligence, we begin to learn how to access our higher self. That self who can observe our ego programming, observe our emotions and our perceptions and our fears and our reactions, as well as the sensations and the functions and the drives of our physical bodies, and learn not to be bound by them. In Unity, we often say, I have a body, but I'm not my body. I have these thoughts, but I'm not these thoughts. I have these feelings, but I'm not these feelings. And as we begin to experience that capacity to live from that higher perspective where we can observe, that's where we get the chance to pause and choose again. Rather than being run by those things, rather than just saying, that makes me so angry, that always makes me angry, we get to rise above that and go, wow, I'm getting angry again. Is that really what I want to do? So we develop a meta-awareness about ourselves. And that adds to our capacity to do that for others. As others react, we understand that just as we have all kinds of triggers, so do they, and there's probably something else going on for them as well. In that way, again, we have the capacity to learn how to choose and create something different for our lives. But it requires more than just awareness. As I noted at the beginning of this exploration, obtaining spiritual maturity and the benefits that go with it requires an intentional commitment and an engagement with specific practices and disciplines that enhance our spiritual growth. And we've been talking about them throughout this entire series. What I have learned along my journey is that it doesn't really matter which book we read, which model of EQ or SQ we engage, what class we take, or what spiritual path we choose to follow. Now, I do have to make a caveat here that there is a significant difference between spiritual paths and some religious paths. Spiritual paths inherently are grounded in love and invite growth and expansion in consciousness, where there are some religious paths that are grounded in fear and seek to stifle and limit and control. So the spiritual intelligence model makes a clear distinction that it isn't necessarily talking about religion, but it's talking about this higher self, this other dimension of who we are. So in that, it doesn't matter which path of these growth paths we choose, but what matters is our intention to grow. With our intention to become a student of life, the teachers will appear. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. And it may take the form of an experience, a challenge, a person, but that person may not show up like a teacher. They may show up like a huge challenge in our face, and they're often our greatest teachers. And it may show up as opportunities, and all we have to do is say yes, again, and again, and again, and again. And we all know when we're in that open mode to learn and grow and take on challenges, and when we decide we want to go hide. I know when I do that. When I decide I'm just going to go do which I did a week or so ago, a Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman marathon, where I'm going to spend like all day watching TV. And the amazing thing was, even there, I was brought back into learning, because the lessons of this 90s TV show were all about the lessons that we're dealing with today. All about diversity in a community and the role of men and women, and people being afraid of things that are new and having to get welcome the ideas of medicine into their world, and then in medicine be able to welcome the ideas of Native American healing into their world. I was just sort of amazed, which is why I kept watching the next series. It was just, we can't escape it when we decide we're going to be students. Ultimately, through this process, we become what Wigglesworth describes in her fourth quadrant of spiritual presence and social mastery. In essence, having our lives be a demonstration of wisdom, compassion, courage, humility, leadership, integrity, vision, purpose, and equanimity. In essence, being a transforming, peaceful presence in the world. And realizing that it's always about becoming. It's not a destination that we ever reach, but a way of continually showing up, a way of continually evolving into ever deeper realizations of our inherent interdependence with one another, as well as with our Earth biosphere. In essence, it's growing into the awareness that we are truly one. And it's this expanding consciousness that we've watched over, Unity used to teach these truths, and now we've seen these same teachings in magazines and in all the other churches and on Oprah and in just the world of self-development and self-help. But it's this journey that we can witness that we've been on that is allowing us to evolve out of our current understanding of freedom as being essentially connected to our individuality and into a new and unprecedented realization that our true freedom and identity can only be known in relationship to the whole, or as Jesus described it, in loving one another. How powerful his words were when we come to them with a new understanding. Now, standing on this side of that leap that we're being called to make in consciousness, in faith, into oneness, always seems to appear to involve a loss. In this case, I know for me, the idea of leaping into oneness feels like I have to give up me. Feels like I have to give up my individuality. It feels like my freedom is about, well, what do I want to do? If I join into the whole, I have to give up that freedom to go with what everybody wants to do. Anybody ever worry about that? It's so inherent in our American culture that we often don't even see it. But if we get deep into ourselves and recognize what's going on, I know as much as I study, welcome, pray, experience oneness, I also sort of cling to this individuality that is Vicky. But when we stand on this side, it's because, as our scripture reading said, Paul said, we now know only in part. And we can't and won't know fully until we trust and take the leap, for then we will see face to face and realize that nothing is lost as we experience what it means to be fully known, as illusions of separation dissolve. How many of you have taken that leap of faith thinking you're going to lose something only to find out that what you thought you were going to lose doesn't even matter anymore, that you don't even notice that it's gone? That's what this spiritual journey is about and what taking a leap of faith is all about. So in the meantime, we just keep working the program, following the way, and reaping the benefits. In essence, knowing and living the truth that sets us free and allows us to experience more heaven on earth right here and right now. So next week, our final lesson in this series, we're going to be looking at the benefits to be found in our evolving prosperity teaching. Prosperity teachings, just like healing teachings, are one of the foundational truths of unity, one of the most practical applications that unity has done over the years. And it has continued to change and grow, and so we're going to next week look at where at least my understanding of our prosperity teachings are and how they bless our lives. So, as always, stay tuned.
You now to just get comfortable in your seat, and if it's comfortable, gently close your eyes. Start to bring your awareness into your body, allowing all the outer distractions to fade away as we bring our focus and attention to that inner space. Just allowing your body to relax and your mind begin to relax. Taking some deep, slow breaths to bring you more fully into this present moment. So breathing in deeply and exhaling slowly. And again, breathing in deeply and exhaling slowly. I invite you now to begin to bring your awareness to your heart space. If it helps, you can place a hand over your heart area to support that awareness. Just gently become aware of that heart beating inside your chest. And now I invite you to begin to take some slow, deep breaths, imagining as if you were breathing into your heart space. Just slowly and deeply breathing in and out of the heart. You can even imagine as if there was a little hole in your heart, that you were just breathing that oxygen into your heart and breathing out of your heart. And as you continue to focus on your heart area, I invite you now to bring to mind something in your life that gives you pure joy. Something that's uncomplicated. Maybe a beloved pet, a beloved child, a beautiful place that you love to visit. And just call that thing to your mind and allow your heart to begin to fill with gratitude and appreciation for that object or that place or that being. And as you're feeling that appreciation, continue breathing in and out of your heart space. The heart has its own intelligence, its own deep inner knowing. And when we can align that intelligence with the thinking mind, we have access to all the understanding and intelligence of the universe. Just allowing yourself to continue to drop down into your heart space. The more we spend time in quiet meditation, aligning our heart with our mind, the more we can begin to trust that we will be guided from that place. Using our heart and our head in tandem. We just allow that spiritual wisdom to guide us in every aspect of our lives. This heart intelligence will never lead us wrong. It will always guide us to our best and highest good. And so I invite you now to just ask your heart what message it has for you today. What deep inner knowing is bubbling up through that heart space, longing to be heard and acknowledged and seen. And just allow that heart wisdom to reveal itself to you for just a few moments in the silence. And so as we begin to bring our awareness back to this time and place, we return with a greater awareness of this resource that's always available to us. If we just take some quiet moments to focus on our heart space and take some deep breaths, we have access to all the spiritual intelligence we need. And we can trust this intelligence to guide us. And for this we are so grateful.